Have you ever dreamed about waking up in the Home Alone house with its classic 90s vibes? I'm an interior designer, and today I'm going to show you how you can recreate the aesthetic in your own space with its cozy colors, classic details, and overall Kate McCallister aspirational style. Let's get into it. My name is Anne, and we are talking about, if not the most famous movie house of all time, definitely the most beloved because it's visited literally by thousands of people, if not tens of thousands of people. I don't know the real number every year. And it wasn't even filmed in that house, it was all filmed in a set. So there's just something so magical about what they did, combining those studio sets with the exterior shots of the film, that even today, people still see it as just this quintessential, cozy, inviting space. And so I want to help you recreate that for your own home. Kevin running around the house gives us a good chance to look at all the decorations that they have and styling. So of course it feels really homey despite being a more kind of formal traditional home. And I think that comes from the layering. There's definitely patterning in the wallpaper and then that red and green. The first few times you may not even notice, but literally the whole house is decked out in red and green, and not just for the holidays. So I think if you indulge me in some color theory, red and green are, of course, opposites on the color wheel, meaning they're complementary, which just means they pack a strong punch together. And I think that's one of the most iconic things about the movie that we're going to recreate here, but a little less festive and a bit more fresh. So with that being said, let's get into how you could decorate your space like Kate McCallister from Home Alone, starting with a really basic traditional foundation with warm wood, slightly darker tone floors, and then just white on the walls, a fireplace between those two windows. And of course, the first thing we need to do is add wallpaper. So I do think the one from the movie was a Ralph Lauren wallpaper, I think I heard. Definitely, they had a ton of different ones throughout the space. I actually went with Laura Ashley. It's definitely the same time period and general, like kind of classic floral aesthetic. So I did a couple things here to change up what they had in the movie. In the movie, they had more of kind of like a medallion pattern, a bit more formal feeling. So I think this kind of all over floral pattern fits a bit more cozy and casual. And then the other thing that I did was I chose one that added in a third color. So it's not just the red and green, it's also blue. And adding in that third color is going to be what helps, make it more year round, not just quite so Christmassy, and a little bit more accessible. And so in terms of the trim, I chose White Dove from Benjamin Moore. This is kind of a classic, slightly warm white, which I think is appropriate for the trim and the fireplace mantle. I am showing one other option that's kind of more that medallion style from Laura Ashley. And then we add in the soft finishes. So they had a red traditional styled rug on the bottom of the floor, and this one is from Revival, so it's vintage. So Revival has a ton of different vintage options, so if this one isn't still available, I'm sure they have similar ones. I think it kind of anchors the space with that traditional feel. And then for the curtains, she had more of a damask pattern. I think they had a valance too. You don't really see valances as much anymore, so I went just for a French pleat at the top, and this is just a plain green velvet pattern, no pattern, from Etsy. And she had more of a jade green to her sofa and curtains. Instead, I went for this ivy. I think it's a little bit more casual and soothing maybe than the jade that she had, but I am going to include a link because the sofa that I'm showing later does come in kind of more of a color that she had. We get into the basic arranging of the furniture. So which I'm doing here is a bit more traditional with it being zoned into this one area. So on the one side, they had this taller display cabinet. Theirs had, I think, kind of crosses, like X's to it. I chose this one. I think it's a little bit more simple, streamlined. And then on the left side of the room, they had a console table, which really isn't that functional for a living room space. So I decided instead of adding another chair or sofa to do a desk. So it's very similar style, but just a little bit deeper. I mean, for a desk, I'm looking at mine's probably not as deep as ideal. You want like at least 20 inches deep, probably more. So I think this is a great use of the space to make it more multi-purpose. And then after that, we get into some of the seating. So they had an armchair and ottoman in the corner. Theirs were matching. I chose to loosen things up a bit and do mismatched. Theirs were also this jacquard or floral pattern, and I thought that felt like a little heavy if the wallpaper is already super floral. So I found instead this kind of like horse hunt pattern, which I think is really cool. That like classic country feel. It actually made me think of the jockey statue that they have in the front of their house. And I liked the colorways being like creams and browns and reds. Just feels kind of crisper. And then I did a mismatched blue on the ottoman. So I'm bringing blue throughout the space to relate to the wallpaper. And again, just to break up some of that red and green. And after that, they had that armchair in that kind of useless corner of the room. So I'm moving it over here. This is a red swivel instead of the more traditional one that they had. I think swivel armchairs can be great. If you have a longer space, maybe they go in the middle so they can kind of serve both sides of the room. Just a lot more flexible. And I liked the curve to it. I think this red is super pretty. It's kind of like a wine red. They had a 3-legged table. I chose this one. I thought it was just kind of like a more interesting take on a 3-legged table. And then after that, of course, the green sofa. Like I said, I'm doing an ivy, so this matches quite closely the curtains that we have here. And I think some matching is in line with this aesthetic, so I'm cool with those two things matching pretty closely. This is a slipcover from Interior Define, and it is in a love seat scale because I think in these narrow colonial living rooms, if you are orienting it this way, you're probably going to want a love seat so that you can access both sides for circulation. I just wanted to take a moment to talk about this architectural style and how it's actually a bit tricky. The McCallister's home is a center hall colonial, meaning the stairs are in the center and then it's kind of a symmetrical configuration off of that. And so this awesome YouTuber did this whole 3D model, which is very cute. And you can see here, what is tricky is that living room off the center is bifurcated with this passageway to get to, maybe it's like a den here for them. And so you kind of create this zone near the window that's not fully a part of the room, not a separate room. It's like, what do we do with this space? So what they did in the movie is they zoned it by having the sofa, like the back of the sofa where you walk through. It's basically saying like, this is the living room. And then the window part, they just put accent pieces like a piano, this red accent chair that probably doesn't get used all that often. So it's kind of like a more decorative zone. It's also tricky in these center hall colonials because they tend to have these French doors where the swing of them also impedes the space a bit. So one approach is to zone it. That's what I'm going to show today in the rendering that I'm doing. But another approach that I did with a friend was if you just turn the sofa 90 degrees, it opens up the space and then you can treat that whole long area as one room. And I actually put a day bed in that window area. So it doesn't have like a high back to be blocking the window or anything, but it does kind of feel like part of the rest of the space. And if you have guests over, they can easily communicate between that main sofa and that daybed to the side. So just something I wanted to point out because this is a beautiful style home, but it can be a bit tricky with how we live nowadays. And then, coffee tables. So you can't see this in the view, but I just wanted to show you. I think theirs was a pretty traditional, like Queen Anne has that cabriole leg. So you can get that custom fabricated or just an example of a vintage one you could get. I feel like I had this in my house growing up, but I actually liked this wafer one being a circle more. I think it kind of feels lighter in the space and just a little bit more airy with that same leg style to it. And then after that, they had a Queen Anne style sofa table, which I do like having a table behind a sofa, especially when it's in the middle of the room. I think it just makes everything feel more like anchored. So I do like that here. I'm showing that one that can be customized in terms of, I think, the wood finish, maybe the handle pulls. I feel like you don't see this style anymore of pulls. Like nowadays, everything's just a bar pull. So I actually kind of like the detail on that. So, and then they had a brass task lamp. Very hard to say, on the sofa table, which is pretty to add some height. Of course, this only works, if it's battery powered or you happen to have a junction box in the floor. Some houses do. My parents actually do, but definitely not one that was built in this time period. But I do like adding it there for some softness and ambient lighting. It's just an example of something you can do on a movie set that is a little trickier in real life. And then adding in some other lighting, they had 2 red table lamps on that console table. I found these ones from Etsy that I think are truly like the ones that they had in the movie. They're the same vintage. So that's really cool if you want to do something close to what they had. And even doing the 2 instead of just 1 just feels very like traditional. Symmetry is really big in these center hall colonials, so I think it makes sense. Instead of the red, I found these blue ones from Ralph Lauren. a bit more streamlined, but still very classic feeling. But that blue is just a bit more fun and fresh while maintaining kind of that traditional feel. So I liked making this switch. I think it's pretty. And then this is where I realized that I was going more into cottagey cozy, and this is more classic cozy. So let me explain. Kate had two very small scale green lamps on the mantle. They kind of had a scallop detail to the shade. So I found these ones, and at first I was like, oh, these are perfect. They're really cute. And then I realized they're way too cottagey because they have that turned detail to the base, and then even like the patterning on the shade itself is kind of like cutesy cottagecore vibes. And Kate is much more classic, and so I streamlined things a bit. I found this one. I also wanted to do a sconce instead of a lamp, just to leave the mantle free if it is the holidays and you want to do a garland or whatever else you want to do on your mantle. I think having a sconce over the fireplace makes a lot more sense. So these are really classic. They still have that fun scallop detailing. The green matches like almost exactly the curtains that I had, so I was really proud of myself. And I think it just feels a lot lighter, and I like it.
That's it.
So then I added a desk chair because, of course, they didn't have it in the movie because they didn't have a desk in here. This is a classic style. It's this site that has a ton of vintage ones, which is very cool. So even if this one is sold out, I think you could find another similar one. And then I did a custom cushion on top. I love this Etsy seller who I've bought cushions from, so I'm showing one of the patterns that she has. So she'll be linked. I've used her for bar stools that I had. This was a chance to add in blue again. So I think, not just doing red and green, but doing red and blue or doing green and blue in areas throughout the room just helps break it up. And the plaid patterning just feels really appropriate for this classic style. Again, to kind of bring some straight lines in to break up all of the floral patterning. And of course that chair, it swivels, so you could turn it around and just use it when you have guests over, or you can truly use this as a desk space. So I liked that styling. Okay, and then accessories over the fireplace. I'm not showing Christmas decorations in here. Of course, you could do that, but I wanted this to feel a little bit more evergreen. That's not a Christmas tree, right? Pine trees, yeah, evergreen. So they had a wreath above the fireplace. I liked that round shape, so instead I did a mirror. This mirror style is kind of inspired by the mirror they had in the entryway in the movie, which had like a filigree detail to it. This is a new one. I'm showing an image, though, of one that I have. That's a vintage one, so you can certainly find these at vintage shops. This was from one in DC like 10 years ago. And actually when I bought it, it was horizontal and I switched it to vertical. And by myself, I mean, I had my dad switch it to vertical for me because I just liked it a lot more being vertical. And I actually have my Christmas tree up that you can see there. But this one that I found is also pretty. And then they had these like brass animals throughout. I think in front of the fireplace on the floor, maybe they were doves. I don't know birds. But I liked these ones I found that were cranes. I thought the height was kind of fun. And then this antelope on the mantle is from an Etsy seller. I think it's vintage. So just something different to accessorize with while still everything is matching. It's all that really yellowy brass. I feel like nowadays you see, that kind of matte, muted brass because we're afraid of color or something. So I liked throughout this space having that bright brass everywhere. It's that really like yellow, classic polished brass. So I think that's pretty, especially against these richer colors behind. And then they did have a frame. I'm linking a couple of frame options and I just put Kate in there because I'm cheesy like that. And then they had a fireplace screen that was, I think, maybe like 5 arches or something. So I liked that this one still had a curve at the edge, but otherwise was straight across. It just felt less fussy, less old or something. So after that, just accessorizing, they had greenery throughout the house. Pillows. Pillows are really important to bring in some extra colors to kind of amp things up or tone things down. So we're amping up a bit with extra red on that one pillow. I love the patterning on this like green and red and blue floral pillow with the ruffles. I think it's so pretty. A light blue pillow and then kind of like a crisp white one, which again, I think the crispness is important. That has some line work to it. Even with the red and blue, they have kind of floral patterning to them. So again, it's like reinforcing the aesthetic, bringing in some of that crispness with that blue blanket. You know, I love dark and light blue together, so that's what's on the sofa. They had literally a red blanket on the green sofa, and I just could not do that. Maybe for the holidays, but I liked putting the blue on the green. And then they did, over the console table, have like probably a recreation of 19th century French landscape. So I found something similar vibe on Etsy with a pretty gold frame. You know, I toyed with the idea of doing a more modern art piece, but I just liked this. I think sometimes we can just lean in and go all the way with the classic look. The other thing I realized, I found myself going cottagey again. So I did, I don't know, a few weeks ago, the holiday cottage with Iris. So maybe that's still in my mind, or maybe just nowadays when we think of traditional, we think of like cottagey instead of kind of that more like crisp traditional. So they have plants everywhere. So I was looking for a plant stand, and at first I pulled up this one on the left with the turned pedestal detail, and I'm like, oh my God, that's like cottagey. No, that's not it. It's like cutesy cottagey. This is much more like classic Queen Anne cabriole legs. So that's the planter I went with. But I just wanted to put them side by side because you might think, oh, it's a 3-leg wood planter. It's exactly the same, but it's not. So this is the minutia that my brain gets into. Hopefully it's helpful to think about which is more your style.
Nice tip. Thanks a lot.
And so here's the overall picture of what we've done together. I think you could look at this and know it's inspired by the Home Alone house, but also still come into it in the summer and have it feel just as fresh and just as inviting. So I actually really love this. I think this is super pretty. You're not seeing a lot of this Queen Anne cabriole leg, kind of crisp traditional vibe now. So I like it. And hopefully you find pieces that you like as well. So I need to get going because my family is invading my space.
I made my family disappear.
But I wanted to show you a breakdown of how we do this. We start with those soft finishes: rug, wallpaper, curtains, paint. Then we add the furniture. Of course, you can see here the repetition of the lines with those cabriole legs, the Queen Anne style, and then some classic, you know, slipcover, pretty streamlined, pretty classic. And then we add in the lighting. Again, it was all that yellowy, crisp brass, which is really pretty against the richer colors. And then the accessories are definitely important in terms of that more vintage feel, like in the mirror and the artwork that you have, and then using pillows as an opportunity to decide what colors you want to accent in the space. So this is definitely a character in the movie as much as any of the people are. It's basically the whole premise of the movie is that the house is so desirable that they want to break into it.
Hey, look, that house is the only reason we started working this block in the first place. Ever since I laid eyes on that house, I wanted it.
And you can see why with how appealing and pretty and just timeless a lot of this style is. So I hope you took something away from today's video. Like I said, all the product links are below. Please let me know what you would like to see next, and I will see you next time.